Most men spend years trying to become attractive, without ever confronting the one truth that actually changes how women see them. So they chase techniques, perfect messages, calculated confidence, carefully rehearsed behavior. But the harder they try to be desired, the less magnetic they become, because attraction was never designed to reward desperation. The Stoics understood something brutal about human nature long before modern psychology ever studied it. People are drawn toward those who are emotionally complete without needing constant validation from others. And that is the harsh truth most men spend their lives avoiding. There was a man named Adrian. Quiet, disciplined, unremarkable at first glance. He was not the loudest man in the room, not the richest, not the most physically impressive. Yet women consistently gravitated toward him in ways other men could not understand. At first, his friends assumed it was luck, then charm, then mystery. But over time, Adrian realized something deeper was happening. Women were not responding to performance. They were responding to absence. The absence of neediness. The absence of emotional desperation. The absence of hidden hunger for approval. And strangely enough, that absence created presence. One evening, Adrian sat with an older philosopher who had spent decades observing human behavior. Their conversation drifted toward attraction, relationships, and emotional psychology. The old man smiled faintly before saying something Adrian never forgot. Most men repel attraction because they make women responsible for their emotional worth. Adrian asked what he meant. The philosopher leaned back calmly. When a man needs a woman to feel valuable, she feels the weight of that need immediately. That sentence stayed with Adrian for years. Because once he began observing carefully, he saw it everywhere. Men seeking reassurance through attention, through pursuit, through validation disguised as romance. And the emotional pressure behind it exhausted women silently. This became the first harsh truth. Women are deeply affected by the emotional energy beneath a man's behavior, not merely the behavior itself. A compliment can feel attractive, or emotionally heavy. Attention can feel calming, or suffocating. Everything depends on whether the man giving it is emotionally grounded or emotionally dependent. The Stoics believed that attachment to external validation weakens inner stability. Adrian finally understood why. Because emotional dependency leaks into everything. The way a man speaks, the way he texts, the way he reacts to silence, the way he handles rejection. And women notice these things far faster than most men realize. Weeks later, Adrian met a woman named Elena. Intelligent, elegant, emotionally perceptive. Unlike most men around her, Adrian did not immediately try to impress her. He listened carefully, spoke slowly, maintained his own rhythm emotionally, and that unsettled her more than attention ever could. Because the second harsh truth is this. Women become curious about men who do not emotionally chase approval from them. Neediness is predictable. Calm self-possession is rare. Elena noticed it immediately. Adrian did not react emotionally to every shift in her tone. Did not panic during silence, did not overperform to maintain her interest. And because of that, his presence felt emotionally spacious instead of emotionally demanding. One evening, she asked him directly, "Why do you seem so unaffected all the time?" Adrian smiled faintly. "I'm affected," he said calmly. "I'm just not controlled by it." That answer stayed with her. Because emotional control creates a feeling women instinctively associate with safety. Not emotional suppression. Stability. The Stoics warned that people ruled by emotion eventually become ruled by fear. And fear destroys attraction quietly. Fear of losing someone. Fear of rejection. Fear of not being enough. Most men believe these fears remain hidden. They do not. Women feel them constantly through behavior. This became the third harsh truth. Women lose attraction when they sense a man abandoning himself emotionally for approval. Not because women are cruel. Because emotional instability creates pressure. And pressure suffocates attraction over time. Adrian observed this pattern everywhere. Men becoming overly agreeable, overly available, overly reactive emotionally, all in the hope of securing affection. But affection built through self-abandonment never creates respect. The Stoics believed self-respect forms the foundation of all meaningful relationships. Without it, attachment becomes dependency. And dependency creates fear. One rainy evening, Elena sat across from Adrian in a quiet cafe and asked something unexpectedly vulnerable. "Do you ever worry about losing people?" Adrian looked out the window briefly before answering. "Yes." She waited. "But I worry more about losing myself trying to keep them." Silence followed. Not because the words were dramatic, because they carried truth without performance. And truth without performance reaches deeper than charm ever will. That became the fourth harsh truth. Women are drawn toward men who value their own peace enough not to sacrifice it for temporary approval. Because a man who can walk away from emotional chaos calmly feels emotionally stronger than a man who clings desperately to avoid loneliness. As time passed, Elena noticed another difference in Adrian. He did not center his life around romantic pursuit. He had purpose outside attraction. Discipline, routine, direction, internal standards independent of relationships. And this changed the emotional dynamic completely. Because the fifth harsh truth is this: a man becomes more attractive when his identity is not built entirely around being desired. Purpose creates gravity. Men without purpose often become emotionally consumed by validation. And emotionally consumed men unconsciously pressure women to regulate their self-worth constantly. That pressure eventually becomes exhausting. The Stoics admired people who remained internally anchored regardless of external circumstances. Adrian embodied that naturally. One evening, Elena asked him softly, "What makes someone emotionally attractive to you?" Adrian thought carefully before answering, "Peace." She looked surprised. He continued calmly, "Most people bring unresolved chaos into relationships and call it passion." That sentence unsettled her because deep down, she knew how true it was. Many relationships begin through chemistry, but collapse under emotional instability. Attraction alone cannot stabilize emotional immaturity. And that revealed the sixth harsh truth. Emotional discipline is more attractive long-term than emotional intensity. Anyone can create excitement. Very few people create peace. Weeks later, Elena realized something she had never admitted before. Most men she had dated wanted admiration more than connection. They wanted to feel chosen, validated, desired. And because of that, relationships became emotional negotiations instead of genuine connection. Adrian was different. He enjoyed her presence, but did not emotionally depend on it to feel complete. That difference changed everything. Because the seventh harsh truth is this: women feel safest around men who already feel whole without them. Not indifferent men. Grounded men. There is a difference. Indifference creates emotional distance. Groundedness creates emotional freedom. The Stoics believed freedom begins when emotional survival no longer depends on external circumstances. Adrian had learned that through solitude long before Elena met him. And women sense that kind of inner stability almost immediately. One night, Elena asked him something quietly while they walked beneath dim city lights. "Why do most relationships become emotionally exhausting?" Adrian smiled faintly. "Because most people enter relationships trying to escape themselves." Those words stayed with her long after the night ended. Because she realized how many people seek love not from abundance, but from emotional emptiness. And emptiness always demands more than another person can sustainably provide. This became the eighth harsh truth. People who cannot sit peacefully with themselves eventually create emotional instability inside relationships. Loneliness unresolved becomes dependency. Insecurity unresolved becomes control. Fear unresolved becomes jealousy. Everything internal eventually spills outward. The Stoics warned constantly that inner disorder creates outer suffering. Adrian understood now why that mattered so deeply in love. As months passed, Elena noticed something else. Adrian never rushed intimacy emotionally. Not because he lacked feeling. Because he valued clarity more than emotional impulse. And that restraint created trust naturally. Which revealed the ninth harsh truth. Patience signals emotional strength far more than impulsive passion ever will. Impulsive men chase immediate reassurance. Disciplined men observe before attaching deeply. That emotional steadiness creates safety. And safety creates long-term attraction far more reliably than temporary excitement. One evening, Elena looked at Adrian carefully before asking, "What's the biggest mistake men make with women?" Adrian answered almost immediately. "They make women the center of their emotional identity." Silence followed. Because she understood the truth inside those words immediately. When a man abandons himself emotionally to secure love, he slowly destroys the very qualities that created attraction initially. Self-respect weakens. Purpose fades. Emotional stability collapses. And women feel that shift instinctively. This became the 10th harsh truth. Desperation kills attraction faster than rejection ever will. Because rejection still preserves dignity. Desperation sacrifices it. And finally, after years of observing people carefully, Adrian understood the deepest truth of all. Women are not irresistibly drawn to men who need them desperately. They are drawn to men who choose connection freely without losing themselves inside it. That became the 11th harsh truth. The less a man needs validation to feel complete, the more emotionally magnetic he becomes naturally. Not because he is pretending not to care, but because his peace no longer depends entirely on being chosen. And perhaps that is why emotionally grounded men affect women so deeply. Their presence does not feel emotionally hungry. It feels stable, free, safe, and in a world filled with emotional desperation disguised as romance. That kind of calmness feels almost unforgettable. And unforgettable people are rarely the ones who tried hardest to be remembered. They are usually the ones who remained most connected to themselves while everyone else was performing for approval. Elena began realizing this slowly. Not through dramatic moments, but through contrast. The more time she spent around Adrian, the more she noticed how emotionally exhausting many other interactions had always been. The constant need for reassurance. The subtle pressure to regulate someone else's emotions. The invisible burden of keeping insecure people emotionally stable. She had grown so accustomed to those dynamics that she once mistook them for normal intimacy. Now she saw them differently. Not as love, but as emotional dependency disguised as connection. One evening, while sitting beside Adrian in complete silence, she noticed something unusual. She felt calm without needing anything from the moment. No pressure to entertain. No pressure to impress. No pressure to emotionally maintain the connection. Just peace. And peace without tension reveals truths people usually avoid seeing. After a long silence, she spoke softly. "You know what's strange?" Adrian looked at her calmly. "You never make me feel responsible for your emotions." He remained quiet for a moment before answering. "Because they are my responsibility." That sentence affected her more deeply than compliments ever could. Because most people never truly understand emotional responsibility. They unconsciously hand it to others. Their happiness, their insecurity, their loneliness, their self-worth. And eventually, relationships collapse under the weight of carrying emotions that were never meant to belong entirely to another person. The Stoics believed emotional self-governance was essential for peace. Not emotional numbness. Not isolation. But ownership over one's inner world. Adrian embodied that naturally. And Elena began understanding why it felt so rare. Most people seek relationships to escape discomfort within themselves. But Adrian had already learned how to sit peacefully with his own mind long before she arrived. That changed everything. Because when a person no longer fears solitude, their connection with others becomes choice instead of emotional survival. Weeks passed, and Elena noticed another shift within herself. She stopped feeling the urge to test him emotionally. No subtle games. No strategic distance. No emotional probing to measure his reactions. Because emotionally stable people remove the need for constant reassurance naturally. Their consistency answers questions before insecurity creates them. One afternoon, while walking together beneath soft sunlight through quiet streets, Elena asked him something carefully. Do you think people can actually love someone without becoming dependent on them? Adrian thought for a moment. Yes, he said calmly. But only after they stop expecting another person to complete what they refuse to face within themselves. She remained silent after hearing that. Because she realized how many relationships begin from incompleteness, not wholeness. People searching for distraction from loneliness. Validation against insecurity. Escape from inner emptiness. And eventually, those unresolved emotions begin leaking into the relationship itself. The Stoics warned that inner disorder eventually shapes external experience. Elena could now see that truth clearly in her past. One evening, while rain moved softly against the windows again, she admitted something quietly. I used to think being deeply wanted was the same thing as being deeply loved. Adrian looked at her calmly. It's not, he said gently. She lowered her eyes slightly. I know that now. Because desire without emotional stability eventually becomes possession. And possession is driven by fear, not love. Adrian never tried to possess her emotionally. That was why she trusted him. He gave affection freely, without making it feel transactional, without attaching hidden emotional debt to it, without turning closeness into control. And this revealed another harsh truth most men never confront. Women are not drawn most deeply to men who chase hardest, but to men whose emotional presence feels safe without feeling weak. Safety and weakness are not the same thing. Weak men seek reassurance constantly. Grounded men create reassurance naturally through consistency. That distinction changes everything. As months passed, Elena realized something almost uncomfortable. The traits she once found exciting in emotionally unstable men now felt exhausting. The unpredictability, the emotional highs and lows, the constant uncertainty. What once stimulated her nervous system now disturbed her peace. Because once someone experiences emotional stability deeply enough, chaos stops feeling attractive. It starts feeling dangerous. One night, while sitting quietly beneath dim golden light, Elena asked Adrian softly, "Did you always understand relationships this way?" Adrian smiled faintly. "No." She waited for him to continue. "I learned it after watching what emotional dependency does to people." His voice remained calm, but there was experience beneath it now. "I watched people destroy themselves trying to keep relationships alive at any cost. I watched them abandon dignity, purpose, peace, all because they feared being alone." Silence settled heavily for a moment. Then he added quietly, "And eventually I realized loneliness hurts less than self-abandonment." Those words stayed with Elena long after the night ended. Because deep down, she knew most people stay in emotionally unhealthy situations not because they are loved, but because they are afraid. Afraid of emptiness. Afraid of rejection. Afraid of facing themselves without distraction. But Adrian no longer carried that fear. And perhaps that was the harsh truth women responded to most powerfully without even realizing it. A man becomes emotionally irresistible not when he desperately needs love, but when he can offer it without losing himself inside it. And that kind of man moves differently through the world. Calmer. More patient. Less reactive. Less desperate for validation. Because his identity no longer depends entirely on whether someone chooses him. And in a world filled with emotional hunger disguised as romance, that level of inner stability feels almost magnetic beyond explanation. And magnetic people rarely try to pull others toward them. They simply stop chasing so desperately that others finally feel free enough to move closer on their own. Elena began noticing this dynamic everywhere after understanding Adrian more deeply. The men who constantly demanded reassurance exhausted her quickly. The men who became emotionally reactive over small things created tension almost immediately. The men who centered their entire emotional state around female attention slowly felt unstable, even if they appeared confident at first. But Adrian remained unchanged. Steady, present, grounded in himself before the relationship. And that consistency affected her nervous system more deeply than excitement ever had. One evening, while they sat together listening to distant rain against the windows, Elena asked him something quietly. "Why do emotionally stable people feel so rare now?" Adrian leaned back slightly before answering. "Because most people are overstimulated but emotionally undeveloped." She looked at him carefully as he continued. "They know how to attract attention. They don't know how to create peace." That sentence lingered in the silence between them, because it explained something she had felt for years but never articulated clearly. Modern relationships often begin through stimulation. Constant texting, emotional intensity, instant attachment, validation loops. But stimulation is not connection, and the nervous system eventually recognizes the difference. The Stoics warned against becoming controlled by impulses and external reactions. Yet most people build relationships entirely around emotional impulses. And when those impulses fluctuate, the connection collapses with them. Adrian understood something most men never fully grasp. Attraction built only on emotional excitement requires constant maintenance. But attraction built on emotional safety deepens naturally over time. That became another harsh truth Elena slowly realized. Women may notice excitement first, but they attach most deeply to emotional steadiness. Because steadiness creates trust, and trust allows vulnerability, and vulnerability creates intimacy far beyond chemistry alone. Weeks passed again, and Elena noticed another change within herself. She no longer felt emotionally anxious during distance. Not because she cared less. Because Adrian's consistency had removed the fear that distance automatically meant emotional withdrawal. That shift felt almost unfamiliar at first. Most of her past relationships had conditioned her to associate silence with danger. But now silence simply felt like silence. Nothing more. And that realization brought an unexpected kind of relief. One afternoon, while walking through quiet streets lined with fading sunlight, she admitted something softly. "I think I spent most of my life confusing uncertainty with attraction." Adrian looked ahead calmly. "Many people do." She turned toward him slightly. "Why?" He answered without hesitation. "Because unpredictability activates the nervous system, and people mistake activation for emotional depth." That explanation settled deeply into her awareness. Because she could suddenly see the pattern clearly. The emotional highs and lows. The inconsistency. The constant guessing. None of it had created love. It had only created emotional stimulation. And stimulation is addictive precisely because it feels intense. But intensity without stability eventually becomes exhaustion. The Stoics believed peace reveals truth more clearly than emotional chaos ever can. Elena was beginning to understand why. One evening, while resting beside Adrian in comfortable silence, she asked something more personal. "Do you ever fear someone leaving you?" Adrian thought quietly for a moment. "Of course." She waited. "But fear stops controlling you once you realize your peace cannot depend entirely on another person staying." That answer changed something inside her. Because she suddenly understood the difference between attachment and emotional imprisonment. Most people cling because they believe losing someone means losing themselves. But emotionally grounded people grieve without collapsing internally. That stability creates freedom inside love itself. And freedom, strangely enough, creates stronger connection than control ever can. As months passed, Elena noticed something almost impossible to ignore now. The calmer Adrian remained within himself. The more emotionally safe she felt around him. Not because he lacked emotion. Because he was no longer ruled by it impulsively. He could feel deeply without becoming emotionally chaotic. Care deeply without becoming controlling. Love deeply without becoming dependent. And that balance created something she had rarely experienced before. Peace inside intimacy. One night, while city lights moved softly beyond the windows, Elena spoke quietly into the silence. "I think most people are terrified of being alone." Adrian nodded slightly. Yes. She looked down thoughtfully. And I think that fear makes people tolerate emotional instability they should walk away from. He turned toward her gently. Fear makes people abandon themselves slowly. Silence followed again. But it was understanding silence now. Because she knew exactly what he meant. People stay where they feel unseen. Stay where they feel emotionally drained. Stay where peace disappears. All because they fear emptiness more than suffering. But Adrian no longer feared emptiness. And perhaps that was the deepest harsh truth of all. The men women find most emotionally irresistible are often the men least desperate to avoid solitude. Not because they reject love, but because they no longer use love to escape themselves. And when a man reaches that level of emotional self-possession, his presence begins to feel different entirely. Less needy, less controlling, less emotionally heavy, more grounded, more spacious, more calm, and in a world addicted to emotional chaos. That kind of calmness feels almost dangerously attractive without needing to announce itself at all. And the dangerous part is this. Most people do not even realize why they are drawn to that kind of calmness. They just feel different around it. Safer, lighter, less guarded. Elena noticed this every time she was around Adrian now. Her mind no longer raced ahead searching for problems that did not exist. Her body no longer remained tense waiting for emotional inconsistency. Her conversations no longer felt like emotional negotiations disguised as intimacy. Everything simply flowed. And flow is what happens when fear stops interrupting connection. One evening, while sitting together beneath soft golden light, she asked him something she had been thinking about for weeks. Do you think people secretly test each other emotionally all the time? Adrian smiled faintly. Yes. She looked curious. Why? Because most people don't trust words anymore, he said calmly. They trust patterns. That answer settled deeply into her, because she realized how true it was. People say they care, say they love, say they are different. But eventually behavior reveals emotional reality. Consistency reveals it. Patience reveals it. Reaction under pressure reveals it. The Stoics believed character is exposed most clearly during discomfort, not comfort. Adrian lived that principle naturally. He remained calm during disagreement, present during silence, steady during uncertainty. And those things affected Elena more deeply than romance ever could. Because attraction grows strongest where emotional safety exists consistently over time, not through intensity alone. This became another truth she slowly understood. Women are not emotionally exhausted by love itself. They are exhausted by instability disguised as love. The guessing, the emotional unpredictability, the inconsistency between words and actions. All of it slowly forces the nervous system into survival mode. And survival mode cannot sustain intimacy peacefully. One rainy afternoon, Elena admitted something she had never fully articulated before. I think I used to become attracted to people who made me anxious. Adrian looked at her carefully. That's more common than people realize. She frowned slightly. But why would anxiety feel attractive? He paused before answering. Because many people were emotionally conditioned early in life to associate inconsistency with emotional importance. Silence followed. Because she felt the truth of that immediately. The waiting. The uncertainty. The emotional highs after distance. Her nervous system had learned to interpret unpredictability as emotional value. But now, something inside her was changing. Peace no longer felt boring. It felt healthy. And healthy often feels unfamiliar to people raised around emotional instability. The Stoics warned that repeated exposure shapes perception. What you normalize emotionally eventually begins to feel natural, even when it damages you. Elena could now see how many of her old attractions had been rooted not in compatibility, but in unresolved emotional conditioning. Adrian never tried to win her emotionally. That was what made him different. He was not performing calmness strategically. He genuinely did not need control to feel secure. And women sense the difference between authentic groundedness and manufactured detachment almost immediately. One evening, while they walked slowly through nearly empty streets, Elena asked quietly, "What do you think makes someone emotionally mature?" Adrian thought carefully before answering. The ability to feel deeply without making others responsible for regulating those emotions constantly. She stayed silent after hearing that, because suddenly emotional maturity no longer sounded like confidence alone. It sounded like responsibility. And responsibility is rare in relationships. Most people want emotional comfort without emotional discipline. But discipline is what prevents love from becoming emotional chaos. As weeks passed, Elena noticed another truth emerging within herself. She was no longer emotionally addicted to uncertainty. That addiction had faded slowly without her noticing. She no longer craved inconsistent attention. No longer romanticized emotional distance. No longer mistook instability for passion. Instead, she began valuing something she once overlooked entirely. Predictable peace. Not boring peace. Living peace. The kind created by emotional honesty, self-control, consistency, and mutual respect. One night, while sitting quietly beside Adrian as the city moved restlessly outside, she finally spoke the realization aloud. "I think calmness used to scare me." Adrian turned toward her gently. "Why?" She smiled faintly. "Because calmness forced me to face myself without distraction." That answer revealed more self-awareness than she realized. Because emotional chaos often functions as escape. Escape from loneliness. Escape from insecurity. Escape from unresolved pain. But peace removes distraction. And without distraction, people finally encounter themselves honestly. The Stoics believed solitude reveals the quality of a person's inner world. Adrian had already made peace with his. That was why his presence felt so different. He was not searching for someone to rescue him emotionally. He was offering connection from wholeness instead of emptiness. And perhaps that is what women respond to most deeply without even understanding why. A man who can love fully, without clinging, without controlling, without emotionally collapsing under uncertainty, because his peace already belongs to him before the relationship begins. And when a woman experiences that kind of emotional steadiness long enough, she begins realizing how exhausting emotional chaos truly was all along. Not exciting, not romantic, exhausting. And once that realization becomes clear, everything unstable starts feeling less like passion, and more like noise she no longer wishes to survive through again.